looks like I'm already broken here. So anyway, I feel sad that I know the meetings went a little bit long, but it's been good. A lot of people got questions answered. So I think the plan originally was to run through both presentations and leave it open for questions, but obviously I know people have children and stuff, and if they have to leave, that's great. Again, oh, sorry. So at the end of the day, like some of the folks alluded to earlier, or like John said it too, he just said it. All this is to do is to get information out to folks. We're not telling you to vote one way or the other. Again, just trying to get valuable information out to people. I know they're videoing tonight, so ideally folks that aren't here can view it. Again, I know there's more specific information coming from Pinkerton in a few weeks. We did our best as this committee to put together information we thought that folks would be interested in, factual information. So first out of the box, I'd just like to thank my fellow board members, which are actually Cheryl Axton helped out at this board, and other people on the board were Dr. Littlefield, Marge Pollack, Karen Lassard, Stacy Berry, Tracy Bolduck, Steve Castor, Yvonne Preston, who's helping me tonight, Kara Salvis, and Jack Sweeney, who had to take off early for a hockey game in New Jersey.
Tuition analysis, would you like to cover that? Back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, so this slide's just to give you a little bit of a benchmark, point of reference between Pinkerton and other similar schools, and this would apply whether it be Pinkerton or any of the other MOUs we are talking about today. If you look, just to look at 1 year, if you look at 14-15, if you look at the per pupil cost, we got the number earlier, 10,656.15. That number, it actually spoke to Glenn Nagel, who is Karen's counterpart down at Pinkerton. Pinkerton capital costs and everything's rolled into their tuition number, so that there won't be any extra. If they build a building, they're not going to charge us for the bond, any of that stuff. It's all rolled into the number, and that's why I did the same. Actually, Karen helped me with Manchester, because when we had the agreement with them, obviously we agreed for 20 years to pay a portion of those capital costs, which has been modified because of the new negotiated settlement. And again, assumptions for the analysis, we used freshman enrollments for 15-16 through 17-18 were based on this year on a percentage basis, which is a reasonable assumption. 2% increase for the Pinkerton tuition, because that's what they've been for the last 5 years. The Manchester per pupil calculation included capital costs, as that's included in the Pinkerton cost, like I just mentioned. Analysis does not include any students attending other schools. Obviously, special ed tuition rates will vary depending on the IEP, and the 14-15 Manchester capital cost this year would include that $100,000 I spoke about earlier. Moving on. So, at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, this is what the vote means, yes or no. So, voting yes on the warrant article. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm reading my paper here. So the 10-year contract with Pinkerton Academy would begin 2014-15 school year. Beginning with the 15-16 school year, a minimum of 75 students from the freshman class will be required to attend Pinkerton Academy. Again, Phil had stated earlier, we're like 109 this year so far. First 5 years are considered a transition period in which 75 freshmen per year are required to attend Pinkerton. Again, that's a transition year. And it gives us time to obviously transition to the school. Students currently attending other schools will have the option to transfer to Pinkerton or complete their high school years at their current school, which Phil talked about earlier. Beginning in the 6th year of the contract in the year 2021, up to 10% of the incoming freshman class may select to attend another public high school. One aspect that wasn't brought up earlier when folks were talking about that number is the fact that over those first 5 years, obviously, every class is going to exceed that 10% number. So those kids that are already in other schools will be able to stay there. So in reality, even though it's 10% of the incoming freshman class, it wouldn't be 10% of the whole population until year 9 or 10 of the agreement, depending on how you look at it. Hooksett Public High School students attending Pinkerton, again, 50 to 89%, we get one membership on the Board of Trustees, and greater than or equal to 90%, we get 2 members on the Board of Trustees. So, voting no on Article 3. Current 8th grade class, 14-15, has a 1-year enrollment that will allow students to remain at Pinkerton through graduation. Again, Phil spoke about that earlier. Settlement agreement with Manchester continues through 2018. Hooksett has MOU agreements with the following area high schools. Available seats are determined annually. Currently this year, we have 8 kids at Bow, and there's actually 6 kids at Bow, but there were 8 available. We had 40 available in Londonderry and 20 available in Pembroke. Again, those will be recalculated every year. Pinkerton Academy has tuition agreements with 4 school districts and does provide limited seats for non-sending districts available through an application and acceptance process. If the vote was to be no, that number actually varies every year depending on their board of trustees and the sending town. So again, that number has been all over the place, so that's not a guaranteed number. Important dates to follow up. Pinkerton Academy administration and staff are hosting an information night at Colley Middle School on March 3rd. Obviously, they will expand on some of the items we brought up tonight that Yvonne actually, and we went through fairly quickly because this is kind of like giving a presentation before lunch, except it's before bed, so we're trying to be fairly quick. They'll obviously have more expansive information and more detail than we can have as folks just on a committee. And then Pinkerton Academy will be providing guided tours of their facility on Tuesday, March 4th, again at 5 and 6:30. Those will be guided tours so folks can see the facility down there in Derry. And that's it. I think we can all take questions after this, I believe, too.
I'll promise to move this back down after I'm done. Ray McClett, 9 Evelyn Street. Great presentation. For once, there appears to be some information that's provided to the voters and the parents in this town, and I like it. A lot of good things at Pinkerton. I'm sure it's a fine school. I do have one thing I want to talk about under the tuition analysis, and I don't know if you want to, Phil, but could you put that slide back up under the tuition analysis so everybody can see? Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. So I know it's hard for people to read, so I'm just going to kind of go through it. And I want to make sure I'm clear on something. The tuition settlement, or I should say the settlement with Manchester, is a completely different contractual obligation than the tuition agreement that we have or that you're proposing with Pinkerton, correct?
What did you say?
It's a completely different contract, right? It's a completely different contract with a different school system, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that settlement has already been mediated and we signed off on, and we are obligated to pay capital cost through 2018, correct?
That is correct.
And that has no bearing on the tuition that Manchester charges us, correct?
Yes, it does, right. Actually, prior to that, so the settlement, the amount for the capital costs, right, represent what they were prior to the negotiated settlement. So we've been paying those since 2003.
Correct.
And they are actually, just to give you a benchmark, a couple of years ago when we were looking at building our own high school, I think it's like 3 or 4 years ago now, when that committee presented its findings, they included that number in the tuition number for Manchester.
Right, because we were contractually obligated to pay it through 2018.
Correct. Again, the reason why that was done, because it likens it to Pinkerton, because their capital costs are in the tuition number.
Okay. I disagree with you. And I'm going to tell you that my only problem with this presentation is that it's not factual. You are skewing the per pupil cost so that people believe that it's more expensive next year, the year after, and the year after, and the year after to go to Manchester as opposed to Pinkerton. And that is factually not true. It is intentionally inflating the numbers, and you're being disingenuous at best.
So wait, let me
finish.
Go ahead. Yep, sure.
Okay?
Yep.
I'm going to tell you why.
Yep.
We have agreed to pay those capital costs as part of the settlement. We will pay it whether this contract passes or fails. We will pay that money, period. So it has nothing to do with the cost of tuition, because if starting tomorrow, let's say this contract passes, and starting next year, all Hooksett kids, every freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior in this town decide to go to Pinkerton, we would still have to pay those capital costs.
That is true.
And you would not factor them in to the Pinkerton to the Pinkerton per pupil tuition cost.
I would factor them into the Manchester number. If every kid went to Manchester, I would take it and factor it in there.
Why
So-
would you not do the same if every kid went to Pinkerton?
So Ray, let me get it this way. How would you represent that 800 grand? Where would you put that? That's a cost of going to Manchester. Where would you put it?
It's not a cost of going to Manchester moving forward. It's a cost of going to Manchester over the last 10 years when we signed an agreement in 2003, which we then mediated to get out of. It's the cost of getting out of. It's not the cost to continue to go to Manchester. That's where you're being disingenuous. We would pay it no matter what. It's part of the reason that our school budget went up, because it is it is a legal obligation that this town has, whether we send anybody to Manchester, zero, or everybody, whether we send zero or everybody to Pinkerton. And that's where you're not being real. The tuition contract to go to Manchester is what they charge us, and Pinkerton is what they charge us. The per pupil costs are going to be the same no matter what, because we have to pay those capital costs no matter what.
And those capital costs cost us to go to Manchester. That's part
But
of
they
the cost
cost
of
as
going to
part of the
Manchester.
contract that we got out of, not moving forward.
It's till 2018. It's part of that number, Ray. And
It's
I
not
used,
part of-
everybody always says, go to Karen for numbers. Her and I sat down and looked at the scenario. And again, to represent the total cost of going to Manchester, that's the way we represented it, right? And the other side, you talked about the next, till 2018. After 2018, we don't have to pay those costs anymore, which we did till 2023 originally. So again, if you're going to talk about how we have to pay that money on the front end, how about the money that we're saving on the back end?
Phil, I know how much money we're saving on the back end. This is not about that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not lending this argument to pro or not pro Pinkerton, pro Manchester or not pro. I'm lending this argument to you are being disingenuous when you put this in front of people and help them understand what it's costing us to go to Pinkerton versus Manchester. That's what I'm talking about. It's also disingenuous because you're decreasing the number of students going to Manchester and then dividing that in to that overall amount. You're intentionally misleading people. You know it and I know it, and you're in business, Phil, and if you sat across from a customer and tried to sell him this, he'd throw you out of his office.
Ray, don't
Thank
walk away. You're going to sit up there and yell at me, then you're going to walk away, right?
You're being
the
disingenuous.
The assumptions are right in there.
I
They're
know
right in
what
there.
we have to pay. You're not. We have to pay it no matter what, and that's the point you won't concede.
That's a cost of going to Manchester. I agree.
It's a cost to no matter where we go, Phil. It's a cost no matter where we go because we are obligated. If we send no kids anywhere, we still have to pay that money to Manchester.
That's correct.
So it's not a cost of going to Manchester. It's a cost of doing business with Manchester over the last 10 years.
It's a cost.
That's what it is.
And was an attempt to make apples to apples. Again, that number's got to be
it wasn't.
accounted for.
It was attempt.
Again, how would you say we account for it, Ray? Yeah, I would go with what you want to do. What do you think? Where do we show that
Exactly
number?
what you did in the contract, which is that that was the cost that we had to pay to get out of Manchester. Everyone acknowledges that, myself included. It was the price we had to pay if we wanted choice. But it has nothing to do with the per pupil cost.
Yes, it does. It's
Mr.
a
Well,
cost of going.
We'll
We can agree to disagree.
We'll agree
Yeah,
to disagree.
I agree.
But
'Cause
I believe you're being disingenuous.
you can say that. That's fine.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
Pearl.
You're welcome.
I agree with Mr. McClett, because if you took this out, say we only had one student that was going to go to Manchester next year, would we say that that tuition was $800,000 for one student? It wouldn't be.
David, we
This
didn't
was
do that.
Please let me finish. This was a penalty that this board agreed to have the freedom to get out of the contract. It's very clear that's what it was. And to compare it, what I think this whole presentation missed, and people should be aware of, however you feel about Pinkerton, it's going to cost us more to take a student from Manchester and send him to Pinkerton. That's a fact. It is not reflected here, but it is going to cost us more if that student goes to Pinkerton. And if you disagree, I'd like someone to explain to me how. And I think that was what should have been included for the voters to understand that this contract cost more than what we have.
Mr. Pearl, do you know past 2018 if we will pay capital costs to Manchester again?
I do not.
Right.
What I am saying, Yvonne, is people here should know right now, if we send kids to Pinkerton, it costs more than sending them to Manchester. Nobody knows what's going to happen after 2018 in Manchester. We may have a contract with them that's different. We may have nothing. I do not know.
Ray, I have a problem with you not bringing this back down. But, okay, so here's my other question. Thank you. Okay, so here's my question. There's a lot of, I can't argue with you about the Pinkerton costs being greater because I don't really know that number, and you're just throwing this out without anybody really knowing. So
Throwing
let
a
me
number out,
finish.
Yvonne? It's
Hey,
right there.
You didn't throw. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing what the tuition difference is, but I am also smart enough to see what the tuition rate is for each school. And I'm smart enough, which seems to me like the problem here. You don't think that the public is smart enough to read.
Yvonne, please do not.
So
characterize-
tuition.
We can do
I'm
that
not
because
done.
we voted not to let people do it.
Go ahead then.
Okay, so the tuition rate is listed here, and then the total tuition. Then there's an item line that says capital costs, and then total costs. It seems pretty clear to me that everybody knows after 2018, we don't know if there'll be a capital cost, but this is the scenario for the next 5 years through 2018. I can read, I can see the tuition rate. If I choose to believe that the capital cost isn't going to play in, or I know it's going to end in 2018, I'm an adult and I can figure that out. I'm sure everybody else can read this because it's all itemized.
So you made a presentation which does not inform the voters of the difference of the cost unless they look it up on your table. But you were quick to point out all the other things. But the cost of
What
the
other
warrant,
things? What other things, Mr. Pearl?
all the features of Pinkerton and
Okay,
so forth
it's
that are
about the
not
warrant
related to the
article,
warrant.
right? It's about the warrant article.
Yes,
We're the
and what would
warrant
be-
article committee.
What would be important about the warrant article is to explain the cost impact.
Okay, would you like to
We didn't.
provide that right now? Would you like to provide the cost difference? Would you like to
You're the-
say it?
you're on the
Don't just
committee.
say it.
You're on
Just
the
say
committee,
it. Say
Yvonne.
it. David, come on, just
You're-
say it.
You're on the committee. Why didn't
You can
we
say it right
vote?
now. Well, we didn't, you know what? We're the warrant article committee, and our charge was to inform and educate the public about the warrant article, about Pinkerton Academy, and we did that. And I'm sorry if you didn't like that, but that's what we did. Thank you.